Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this webinar on research design. We hope to have a wonderful conversation this afternoon. Thank you so much for availing yourself and participating. You're more than welcome to pose a few questions as we go along, and I'll relay those questions to our panel members. We are very honored to have quite a number of people here this afternoon that will participate in our discussion and our webinar. And we really hope that you'll enjoy the webinar with us, that you'll go away with some knowledge and insights and perhaps some excitement about the opportunities ahead in research methodology. We have a panel here this afternoon, and we'll start off with their presentations. I'd like to introduce them to you. Let us start by traveling a little bit, and the Netherlands are well represented here this afternoon. Just for a brief introduction, welcome to Dr. Laura Weiss. Laura, it's nice to see you again. We miss you.
Hi, Pepe. Thank you. I also really miss South Africa a lot, especially now with all the demonstrations going on here in the Netherlands and the cold weather. So I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Free Amsterdam University at the moment, and I look at cross-cultural psychology there, actually with South African data, so you can see I still haven't lost touch. And I worked there for a year now, but before I worked for 3 years at Optentia. And yeah, it's nice to see some familiar faces again. And I'm really looking forward, to be with this amazing panel. My field is positive psychology, and I'm especially interested in how we can improve the well-being of very vulnerable groups. So thank you.
Thank you, Laura. We look forward to what you have to share with us this afternoon, all the way from Amsterdam. I say this afternoon, but in other parts in the world, we have a different time slot. And we're going to jump over time zones now, all the way to the United States of America to welcome our second panel member, Professor Kristen Betts. And she is in Philadelphia. We joked a little bit earlier on that after this webinar, I hope to take a swim. And she says it's snowing in Philadelphia now. Kristen, it's nice to have you here.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, it is an honor to be presenting with such incredible panelists. Thank you, Ian, for the invitation in Northwest University. I'm Dr. Kristen Betts. I am a clinical professor in the School of Education at Drexel University. I have been in higher education for over 20 years, teaching and in different administrative roles. My expertise is in online and hybrid learning, looking at pedagogy and instructional design. Most of my research focuses on mind-brain education science, neuropedagogy, student engagement and retention, and faculty development.
Thank you so much, Kristen. We look forward to what you have to present to us this afternoon, and we hope to bring some warmth to your world, at least for the next few minutes that we are together. Our third panel member, a local flavor from the Northwest University. It's such an honor to welcome Dr. Mariette Fourie. Mariette, it's also nice to have you here.
Thank you very much, Geerpier. And then to the rest of our panel members, I agree with you. It is such a wonderful privilege to be part of this exciting group going forward, being innovative and talking about research and how we can actually contribute to student success. So thank you so much for this privilege. And then to all the participants, we are so privileged to have you as part of this discussion this afternoon. I am a senior academic developer at our Center for Teaching and Learning at Northwest University. And I am responsible for research in higher education, especially the vital intersection between teaching and learning and research like the ministerial statement and our Department of Higher Education and Training is advocating for by means of running the SOTL project, Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. And it's such a privilege to also be contributing to the field of scholarship of teaching and learning by contributing to student success. It's such a privilege to be here, and thank you, Geerpier, for this afternoon. We are looking forward to our discussions.
And thank you to you, Mariette. Thank you so much. Our fourth member is Professor Rens van der Schout. He's from Utrecht University, so the Netherlands are well represented here this afternoon. I'm not sure if we do have Prof. Rens in the room as yet. Prof. Rens, are you there? No.
I just contacted him. He is not yet here, but I just messaged him that we have started.
The voice you heard, ladies and gentlemen, was Professor Ian Rothman. He's waiting in the wings, as it were. His turn will come up a little bit later on. So let's jump straight into it. Dr. Laura, we are in your hands, and you have the floor. We look forward to what you have to say to us.
Okay, great. So, I have the honor to start today. And I'm going to talk a bit more about the well-being of postgraduate students, so master and PhD students, and especially at the NWU. So I don't think that I need to convince the people that are here today why postgraduate students are so important. But I want to talk a bit more about why I chose this specific group for my research. And for universities, and I think I don't have my video on now. So I will just, now you can also see me. So for universities, they are important because they are important different means of income than just student fees. So for each master and PhD student that actually gets their diploma on time, the university gets a subsidy, and it's a significant amount. And if students drop out, that can lead to quite a large loss. But they're also important for the South African economy because South Africa wants to develop into a knowledge-based economy. And for that, we, of course, also need highly skilled workers with a high diploma. And the aim of the government was to triple the amount of PhD students in 2030, but we are not anywhere near that. And actually in South Africa, it's quite shocking, but every second postgraduate student drops out at the moment, and the numbers are only increasing in the last couple of years. And not even a third of those postgraduate students who do get their diploma finally to get it in regulation time. And there's now more and more interest around the world, and everywhere we find that there's high level of depression and anxiety, sometimes even higher than 40% of the students that say that they suffer from depressive symptomatology, and low concentration, which is of course bad if you want to study suicidal thoughts. We also had a couple of suicides and quite a lot of attempted suicides across South African universities in the last years, and burnout before they even have started their career. But surprisingly, this group is very much neglected in research and practice, and there's more and more interest for student well-being, but it's especially on first-year students and bachelor students. So first of all, we dived into the literature that there was, and we adapted the very famous job demands resource model into a study demands resource model. And that basically says that every student has certain demands and certain resources, and those have to be in balance. So it's okay to have demands if the resources are also there, and only then a student can have adequate well-being. And well-being in turn has an effect on academic performance. And then we conducted a qualitative study with the aim to explore how postgraduate students experience their study, and how they would describe their own well-being, and also need satisfaction. And that is just based on the self-determination theory that states that every person, and so also every student, has a need for autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So we interviewed 25 participants from all our 3 campuses, and not only master students and PhD students, but also some supervisors of postgraduate students. And we did that with a semi-structured interview scheme where we just let students talk freely. So very often it took 2 hours to interview them, but we also asked some specific questions about the need. And additionally, we conducted 2 focus groups with almost 40 students at the Mexican campus, and our findings also indicated that those are especially vulnerable students. So I just want to highlight some of our findings. There's quite a lot of demands that are posed on students. So from the study, it's of course academic challenges, a lot talked about the long ethics process, but also maybe a bad relationship with the supervisor, or the supervisors not having enough time to give feedback. A lot of them work full-time, so they have to combine work and study, which is really hard. The financial demands of, for example, not to a bursary. Hi, Renz. Welcome. And practical challenges as well. For example, losing all of your data. I heard stories because of power outages, a very typical South African problem when you work, for example, in a greenhouse, or transport to the university and back, and facilities not being there, having to fight, for example, for a place in the lab, or not having access to a laptop. And there's also personal challenges, especially social demands. And a lot of the students said that they have the feeling of being guilty all of the time, either because they're not spending time with their family or friends, who often lack understanding, especially if they're not students themselves, or not being able to study. Then something called Imposter Syndrome, and that is when you have the feeling that anytime now people will find out that you don't really are as intelligent as they thought, and you're not really at the right place. So someone said you have this little bit of doubt that you are here. Did they make the right choice, or were they drunk that day? And then there's also a couple of resources, luckily. So students mentioned the supervisor support, if they had a good relationship, was extremely helpful. But even one person as a librarian can make a difference. Having access to literature, and if available, bursaries, skill training, having a workplace and a computer, and the university or the study enabling contact with people from industry. And those are resources, but if they're not there, there can also be challenges. And personal resources were really nice to hear. So they especially value if they have peer support from other students. And the work experience also made it harder, but also kind of gave them certain knowledge other students didn't have, and also, to be able to deal with pressure, being positive and optimistic, having hope, and also feeling grateful for what you have. Very important ability is being able to ask for help if you need it, having enough free time next to your study. Of course, in South Africa, faith is also important. Love of learning and being motivated from within yourself. And one student described discovering strengths the following way. I think the best thing for me was finding myself and realizing what you're really good at. And I think it shapes your career going forward and shapes who you are and what you believe in. Resilience was also important, and many people called it kind of a stubbornness that helped them, and having the feeling that your study has a purpose and you can make an impact with it to society, so that you are here for a reason. So shortly on well-being, so we did find a lot of students were suffering from depression and anxiety, had a low self-esteem, suffered from stress, and often had very low levels of well-being, so their language. And although they often start very motivated at the beginning and very engaged, many become disheartened by the things they don't have control over during their study. And we also noticed that the well-being is especially low when they don't feel connected to others. And we came across this problem of loneliness and social isolation that is quite a big problem for students, actually. But having resources such as a good supervisor and being resilient supports the well-being. And I have to say I was really impressed by the level of well-being of many of the students. So it is possible to foster an environment where students can flourish, and supervisors should just be aware that they can make or break a student. And so we should also focus on supporting not only the students, but also the supervisors. And very often the supervisors have, of course, the ability to support well, and also the will, but not enough time per student. Of course, we should also look at student well-being, involve students in their department, and also give them access to workspaces where they can all sit. And we also developed a PhD support program, and that was a free course for students from all over Africa. And you see a wonderful picture here of the last day with those students. And yeah, we were allowed to train them in their well-being and help them in their development to stay well during their PhDs. And they valued this part of the course very highly. So as a take-home message, we can say that the situation for our students should be taken seriously. And I think Optentia is doing a great job at that. And they really take those things to heart, especially in the short learning program. And that we should not only support students, but also their supervisors, so they are enabled to help them. And it is possible to improve their well-being by creating a positive educational environment. And I also specifically want to thank Marita Heinz and Werner Nell, who are also here today, for their part and important support in this project. And with further questions, you can always contact me under this email address, and I'm very happy to give the word to the next speaker now.
Laura, thank you very much. It's fascinating. I remember your work on the well-being of postgraduate students, and this just explicates it a little bit further. Thank you so much for your presentation here this afternoon. If you do, ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to pose a few questions to our panel members, please do so. Just remember, in the comments section, just mark your question as a question, so that we can then spot it, and I'll relay it to the presenters. All right, moving on from the Netherlands to Philadelphia in the United States of America. Professor Kristen, I'm really looking forward to your presentation as well, speaking a little bit about mind, brain, and education. Kristen, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. And again, it's so exciting to be a part of Optentia in this presentation today. So we're going to start with 2020. We went through a complete worldwide disruption. And there's so much talk right now about going back to a new normal. I would, as an educator and a researcher, like to caution this concept of normal. In education, we are so much about diversity. We are so much about inclusion. We look at the global workforce that we're all engaged in, and we may want to try and redefine that, because I'm not sure we necessarily want to go back to usual, typical, or routine. So I'm going to ask that everybody puts on some glasses today from Mind Brain Education Science, and we're going to talk about some exciting possibilities. So Mind Brain Education Science is actually a relatively new field. It builds upon the learning sciences, and it actually bridges research and practice to support teaching, student performance through teaching. And it's really here at the nexus between neuroscience, psychology, and education. One of the biggest premises of mind-brain education science is the fact that educators are brain changers. So all of you that are attending today and involved in education, whether it be a lecturer, instructional designer, professional development administrator, you are changing brains every day. So we ask, how do you know you're actually changing brains? Well, I'm going to invite a neuroscientist to share just a couple of words.
The premise of my work has been based on the question, if it's your job to develop the mind, shouldn't you know how the brain works? The brain is by far the most complex of all organs that we know of in the entire universe. And it's our job to influence the development of that brain every day in the classroom. And when we do, the architecture, the circuitry, the chemistry of those young brains change, and they do so in very positive ways. If we understand more about how the brain works, we can become better educators, better school board members, and better parents.
So you just heard a top neuroscientist, Dr. Wesson, say that we can change brains in our classrooms, and that's across all formats. So what do we need to know about the brain? Because he did state if we're talking about training and teaching to minds, what do we know about the brain? Well, basically, it's a 3-pound organ, but it is so much more than that. It's actually a network. So by the time you finish this presentation today, your brain will not be the same because you're developing new neural pathways, new connections. The brain is made up of 100 billion neurons, 100 trillion synaptic connections. And everything that we do is connected to memories and networks. So when we talk about information, when you're sharing information in your classroom and creating experiences, you're helping students through transfer of learning first heighten their attention to what is important, because the brain has to filter out what's important. And more importantly, you're helping them to understand the connection between cognition, metacognition, and epistemic cognition, which Dr. Fiore is going to talk about. So when we're taking information and sharing it, we're helping students make connections between neurons based on information and experience. And this is what is happening with your students and even yourself today. So I want you to listen to this short clip by Dr. Laura Boyd, another neuroscientist.
So it's been advances in technology such as MRI has allowed us to make these and many other important discoveries. And perhaps the most exciting, the most interesting and transformative of these discoveries is that every time you learn a new fact or skill, you change your brain. It's something we call neuroplasticity.
So this concept of neuroplasticity is relatively new within neuroscience. So it's the fact that our brains continuously change in response to actions and experience. So when you're teaching a class, we need to really think about how we engage our students in information processing. When your students are sat there saying absolutely nothing, don't be concerned or alarmed or online. I want you to look at this PET scan. It's a positron emission tomography. And look at what happens in the brain on the right-hand side when it's reading, hearing, thinking, and saying something. So you're going to see different parts of the brain light up. So this concept, we only use 10% of our brain, a complete neuromyth. Right brain, left brain, total neural myth. You're going to see when you're thinking the engagement of the prefrontal cortex, which develops into the early 20s. So now we've got to think, okay, how do we do this? Whether we're face-to-face, hybrid, or online, it all comes down to interaction, because every time you are doing something in which you're engaged, you're changing your brain. So we're going to look at 3 types of interaction that I'm going to share with you. I want you to think, although it's been disrupted, we are preparing students for a workforce that will never be the same. They will most likely be working in hybrid working environments, very different dynamic working environments. And if they don't succeed in our classrooms, utilizing different tools, it will be even harder for them, as Dr. Weiss talked about, to move forward and to be successful. So again, looking at preparing students for transfer of learning. So lecture a student, what can you do? If you're online, look at how you can integrate mini lectures. Look at how you can use announcements to prime, to get attention. If you happen to be in a face-to-face teaching environment, how do you create just-in-time videos to post for your students on some of the messiest topics where you're grading papers and saying, you know what, I think they may not get this part. How do you bring people in? The exciting thing is what we're doing right now, 700 participants around the world. Take your classroom, even if you're in a small remote area, invite the author of your textbook to come in. I have people who write articles, textbooks, reports, and I have them come in, and it brings the curriculum to life. Bring in guest panelists. Students can learn more from panelists based on the topics that they're studying. We have comments where students will say, it was like the pages came to life. It was the first time I saw a man of my color presenting in a research area where I see myself going. Bring alumni. These are 4 different alumni who graduated from our program. So optimize technology. Use forward feedback. Instead of having just one long paper at the end, break it down. Help students learn how to learn. Move from cognition to metacognition and epistemic cognition, but hold them where they have to make the changes. So when you look at the rubric, you're required to make changes in an upcoming paper. Why? You have to reflect, you have to learn, unlearn, and relearn. So have that forward feedback so students can even see their own growth. Look at integrating feedback, again, online, but even face-to-face. Use text comments, but with free applications like Vocaroo, include a 30-second voice clip and bring yourself into that student's classroom, regardless of where they're located. Video comments, lots of exciting things you can do. Now let's look at student to student. What can you do? Discussion boards. Turn those into the most dynamic part of your class. Walking around the classroom online, even large classrooms. If you teach a class of 300 students, chances are students may not get to know one another. Optimize your learning management system. Have your 300 students post infographics, short bio infographics, and respond to at least 5 peers in different groups. Have them connect. Look at how you can integrate peer evaluation. Set up groups where they respond to each other if they're in similar topics. Maybe they're in different topics. Maybe have them provide feedback, multimodality feedback, voice, text, video. Lastly, I want you to think about culturally responsive content. So think about if you're building your classroom, even face-to-face, in your learning management system, how do you make sure the content is reflective of your dynamic and diverse student population, your faculty? There's a wonderful quote that says, you can't be what you can't see. So we want our students to see themselves. We also want them to engage in backyard research. If you're teaching online, you may have nurses, educators, teachers from across your continent and across the world who can share information on policies, cultural experiences in a classroom where maybe people haven't even traveled outside of their own state or continent. Look at how you integrate reflection using video. Tell students, pick any application of your choice. Just make sure it's free. Students can choose and then show and self-identify. Ask students to look at how they integrate the arts. I've had students who have drawn pictures for discussion boards. I had a student on a 10-week reflection write a song and sing it on his guitar. That is transfer of learning. So again, how do you scaffold, especially in classes where there's large concepts? Well, what you can do is you can take things such as concept maps and break down large research projects where they have to do outlines, universal design for learning, multiple means of engagement, but representation as well. Take those papers, turn them into something like a Padlet where every week in the discussion board, they post a different section and students learn to love feedback. Why? It's forward feedback. They're making iterations and at the end, all of it goes into their paper, but they're getting rid of that imposter phenomena because they're building that confidence. Lastly, use discussion boards to help students really focus on tough topics before they write papers. I teach courses on neuroscience, creativity, innovation. This is one of my discussion boards, and I want to show you just really quickly. This is what we've done. Students have to learn to differentiate between terms, cognition, metacognition, creative cognition. You could have a typical discussion board, text, text, text. That is not going to be multiple means of representation, and not all students learn best by text. So have them create something where they develop their own dynamic infographic. They have the reference source on the left, and then they have to put it into their own words because they know it. They've learned it. But you can just see here the diversity of the ways that they've approached it through the visuals, through the examples. The last one that I'm going to show you is a really complex topic where students have to talk about the brain and the different 4 lobes in function. One student literally drew it. We have other students who have created a beautiful infographic. Here, another student, again, this is choice, differentiated instruction, took the assignment using Canva And what students are doing is every time they review, it's retrieval, it's space practice, and they're seeing the same content through different perspectives. I think this is my favorite, last one, and then I'm going to wrap up. This student actually took a song and showed how the four lobes come together. I'm going to move it ahead. The past is gone. So you can see how the exact same assignment was done so differently and creatively. Tell your students to really challenge themselves and understand when they do have difficult challenges ahead and they think, oh my gosh, I'm not sure this is where I should be. That is neuroplasticity. They are changing their brains. Learning is challenging. They're out of their comfort zone. They're learning new information. I would be remiss if I didn't give you homework. I'm going to provide you with the link later for the readings, the videos. Try and apply something that you've learned. I've got a link for the labs. Here are some additional resources, the science of learning, an application called Interact 123, wonderful information. And lastly, as we plan for post-pandemic, know that you are brain changers. We can change education going forward, one brain at a time, with transformative teaching and learning. Thank you so much.
Kristen, it's incredible. There are songs that I can sing now, but I'm worried about the copyright. So you've motivated me into song now, but I'll hold it back a little bit. Thank you so much for all the practical advice that you've given us and insights that you've provided. I know that you've spoken now about neuroplasticity, and you most certainly got our brains working. We are here with you. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we are still looking to your questions as well. We're just going to run through the presentations of the panel, and then we're going to give them the opportunity to answer your questions. We've had questions here in general about the Northwest University. There's a question here about do we offer supervision for qualitative research into specifically stillbirth? And again, it depends on the angle that you take with regard to your problem statement, whether or not you're looking at the psychological, the physical, but we will have supervisors for any of those too. Laura, just a heads up, there's a question for you. Have you perhaps in your research looked at different or alternative supervision models than the traditional and the potential effect thereof on the supervisor-student relationship? But we'll come to you a little bit later for that. And Kristen, when you shared that discussion board, people just wanted to know which platform you use and how many students it can accommodate and so on. But we'll give you the opportunity to address those questions a little bit later on. Let us get back to the Northwest University. We've heard of the extraordinary people associated with the research unit, Optentia. You've just heard Professor Kristen Betts, extraordinary professor in Optentia. But now someone full-time in Optentia at the Northwest University, Dr. Mariette Fourie. Mariette, now it's your turn, and we're looking forward to your views on online assessment. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Geert. I'm affiliated with Optentia full-time in the Center of Teaching and Learning. Whichever way, I'm very proud to be part of Northwest University. So thank you so much for that. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, wonderful. I'm going to talk today about online assessment. But before we talk about online assessment, I really would just like to contextualize online assessment. And I'm going to do that in 3 different approaches. The first one is actually framing assessment in higher education. So we are going to look, what does it mean to assess in higher education? And then secondly, we are going to contextualize assessment in the online teaching and learning environment. And lastly then, but not the least, I think it's the most important, drawing from Kristen's presentation and from Laura's as well, what is some practical suggestions for online assessment, especially in the ambit of our remote teaching and learning. So when we look at framing assessment in higher education, I would really like to allude to the fact that we have to acknowledge that there are certain assessment discourses evident in higher education today, not only institutionally, not only nationally, but also globally. And one of the fundamental problems in higher education includes the dominant view of assessment that constructs students in somehow as passive subjects. And students are sometimes seen to have no role other than to subject themselves to the assessment acts of university teachers, to be measured and to be classified. And this might lead to university teachers engaging in somewhat conformative assessment practices rather than transformative in some instances. And as Kristen has indicated and highlighted, that we really have to follow a transformative approach in our teaching and learning. And of course, which assessment is such an integral part of. So assessment policies and practices do not always encapsulate the true essence of why and how we assess. And I want us to just reflect on our assessment practices. What is the true meaning of assessment? How do we frame assessment in higher education? And when talking about assessment, I cannot help by just highlighting quality. So quality matters, as universities are seen as producers of knowledge, not only consumers of knowledge. We have to just be cognizant that the quality of assessment in higher education should be integral to the overall quality assurance process of teaching and learning. And that brings me to say, subsequently, qualifications at any higher education institution due to its accountability to the various stakeholders. So the overall quality of education in the higher education context is a necessary prerequisite to equip our students with the knowledge, with the skills, and with the competencies that they need to be successful after graduation. So graduates, what do we mean by successful graduation and successful graduates? So graduates should typically be able to work with and integrate knowledge in a particular way and access sources of knowledge by also judging its validity. So higher education assessment systems have to ensure that graduates are able to operate effectively and with confidence in any given knowledge society. Another very critical aspect in operating in this knowledge society, how do we prepare our students on a postgraduate level, is referring to the transformation and social justice with a focus on equity, redress, quality, efficiency, and the provision of formal and epistemological access, with the emphasis of fitness for purpose. And what do we mean by fitness for purpose? Our practices should align with the institutional vision and mission. And then hand in hand with fitness for purpose is the notion of fitness of purpose. And that specifically brings me to the transformation imperatives of social justice. How responsive are we as a higher education institution to the social and economic needs of our society? So assessment has always been one of the most challenging aspects of teaching and learning, regardless the delivery mode. And what we are arguing for is it's a more of a socio-epistemic approach to assessment regarding the socio-cultural diversity of our students in their epistemic becoming in higher education. So colleagues, this is in a nutshell just what we cannot look at assessment, apart from framing that in the higher education context. And with having said that, when we contextualize this assessment in the online teaching and learning environment, I think I can start off by saying that online assessment has become evident in teaching and learning conversations lately amongst academic developers, instructional designers, educational technologists, and not the least amongst academics as university teachers. And particularly in the ambit of remote online teaching and learning, we have to rethink assessment opportunities provided to our students in the online teaching and learning environment. We have to consider how we structure our assessment approach in terms of formative and summative assessments, and in some instances, how we apply continuous assessment. I think what is important to understand here is that we should think of assessment for learning, moreover than assessment of learning. So using the assessment tool as a learning tool rather than a jump through the loop or hoop activity or a measurement exercise can really enhance the learning experience of our students, and especially in an online teaching and learning environment. If we want to effectively assess online, we have to be able to teach online, not only using our learning management system as a dumping site, but to really scaffold the learning experience of our students. A guided instructional approach is really, really so important. I would say teaching online is causing a pedagogical renaissance in reflecting upon ways to emphasize then the importance of sound philosophical and pedagogical foundations for one's teaching practice. We have to stop, pause, and reflect. The way we did things in the past has to change in the ambit of how our new context is looking in higher education. Our ontological and our epistemological beliefs definitely influence our pedagogy and the manner in which we provide epistemological access to the discipline, how we teach and how we assess. So important aspects in further contextualizing online assessment will also be discussed amongst the multidisciplinary panel of international experts after our individual presentations. So colleagues, contextualizing assessment in the online environment brings me to some practical suggestions. And context matters. So in terms of what is practical to have effective online assessment, I should start by a sound design of online assessment. And here I want to refer back to Kristen's presentation where we got familiar with incorporating principles of mind, brain, and education sciences, universal design for learning where we have multiple means of representation, of expression, and also engagement. And I also want to focus on cultural responsive teaching, especially in our country where we have a diverse socio-cultural group of students. It becomes actually automatic, and decolonization becomes a non-debatable issue. So if we understand how the human brain learns, we have to know that new knowledge builds on prior knowledge. And if we can't build on any existing substance in our brain structures, there is no learning going to take place. So cultural responsive teaching or cultural responsive pedagogy is a non-negotiable ingredient for student success. Then I can also emphasize a social constructivist approach to teaching and learning, which is also underpinned by the Noordwes-universitei's teaching and learning strategy. So a sound design incorporating all those principles. Of course, there's a lot more, but due to time constraints, I think we are just going to stand still at those, and we welcome any questions from the audience. The next thing I want to emphasize is really feedback. So ensuring that formative assessment practices, and formative assessment, we refer to assessment for learning and feedback. So those two are really inseparable. Feedback is an integral part of formative assessment, and that should be relevant in our teaching pedagogy and methodologies. So incorporating feedback actually as a dialogue between the student and the lecturer. It cannot be one way, it has to be a dialogue. And also feedback has got certain requirements to be effective in terms of time years, being fair, being constructive amongst others, in contributing to students' active learning that allow them to self-regulate their performance. I think it's very important. And what do we mean by self-regulating performance is that entails an active and constructive approach whereby the students set goals for their own learning and then attempt to monitor, regulate, and control their cognition. And I will say something about cognition to add on to what Kristen said just in a moment. And that should also be our assessment approach in terms of feedback, and how we approach this scaffolding of the learning process should also be applicable for future tasks when Kristen talks about the transfer of learning. And we call that towards sustainable development. Remember, framing assessment in higher education, we have to allow knowledge producers. We have to allow students to become confident in any given knowledge society. And it starts all with assessment. And bringing me to the third point is fostering metacognitive engagement and pedagogical intelligence of students. And that will also connect with the presentation that Rens will give. So we are familiar with the concept of metacognition. And metacognition encapsulates thinking about thinking. I think you have heard that a lot. So students have to be metacognitively engaged in their learning in order to make sense of their cognition, of how they think and how they learn. For example, we refer to that also as the knowledge construction process. So whilst metacognition focus on what cognitive strategy is available to solve a problem, epistemic cognition focus on whether a problem can be solved in any given context. So when thinking about epistemic cognition, we focus on thinking about forms of knowledge and ways of knowing. So knowledge, cognition, ways of knowing, and ways of being are intertwined when reflecting upon learning. We can't just only transfer knowledge to our students. We have to allow in our teaching and learning approaches for them to be and then become, or become and then be a scientist. So the knowing, becoming, and being is a very important aspect. And referring back to how the human brain learns, as Kristen has explained, successful transfer of learning can only happen if knowledge is transferred from familiar context in which knowledge were constructed to a new and unfamiliar context. And that's why we have to apply sound assessment practices. That's why we have to apply formative assessment practices. So the effective teaching and learning of transferable skills is one of the key pedagogic changes currently, or challenges currently facing education today. So within fostering metacognitive engagement and criticality, facilitating a deep approach to learning, which we said is important, we cannot expect students to meet any assessment expectation if they don't understand the assessment criteria or the assessment standards. So students, based on their socio-cultural diversity, will definitely interpret these criteria differently. I think that is just the way it is. So, as we said, a social constructivist approach where students are engaged in pre-assessment conversations, for example, taking part in disciplinary communities of practices, is about one endeavor to increase their understanding towards improved learning performances. So this brings me to facilitating this so-called pedagogical intelligence within students is an excellent manner to stimulate metacognition, where students are not only introduced to the disciplinary discourses, but also to the teaching and learning discourses, exactly how the brain processes information, how they learn. They must know how they learn. As Blake and Frithmore 2015 said, we hardly know what's going on in the brain when we learn, but hardly ever what goes on in the brain when we teach. So we have to instill that pedagogical intelligence in our students and how they engage in metacognitive skills, in judging themselves and the module or the course that they are undertaken, to really become a learning partner, to become a co-partner in this learning process. The fourth point is regarding the student's sense of self, and that I think connects very well with the presentation of Laura. So focusing on learner performance towards the student's sense of self, towards a positive emotional impact on learning, actually building that academic confidence is so important through our assessment practices, because sometimes with our assessment practices is where the students are feeling the most exposed. So regarding the students' needs for assessment, for example, what are their needs in terms of online interaction? Kristen has explained 3 types of interactions: student to student, student to content, and then student to instructor. So what are their needs regarding their needs with online interaction and engagement? What presences do you create in the online environment? And that is very important to actually regard that social learning component. Fifth, developing the students' writing skills and academic literacies. I think sometimes we treat it as a separate activity to assessment, but I think with a guided and scaffolded approach, deliberately induct and develop students' writing and academic literacies. And what do we mean by that? The ways of thinking and practicing in the discipline, how knowledge is produced, and learning the strategies for expressing knowledge, for discussing, organizing, and producing text. as part of their learning and assessment journey, I think is just so important. And that is how we provide epistemological access into the discipline. We focus so many times on just providing formal access to education, but it's so important that we allow the student to grow into becoming and being a disciplinary expert. And that is all got to do with how we scaffold and how we assess and how we let them or allow them to partake in their learning journey. Lastly, and I think this is one of the most challenging aspects in online assessment, is fostering academic integrity. And I know there's no one size solution that fits all problems that we as the Center of Teaching and Learning experience, that the academics experience at our university, and not only at our university but other universities, is that in some attempt to foster that, we have to provide clear instructions and communicate expectations to students of our assessment assignments, especially in the online environment. So it's very easy not to understand an assignment, but we have to make sure that we clearly scaffold the instruction, have clear communication. Assessment should be linked to the learning outcomes. There shouldn't be any busy work. So assessment should focus on learning. A guided instruction, like we said, and a scaffolding of the learning process is critically, but we also in the online environment have to balance structure with flexibility. That should be evident in our pedagogical approach. Applying authentic assessment practices, not only allowing students to apply lower order thinking skills, but also higher order thinking skills, application of knowledge. And then lastly, employ alternative forms of assessment, innovative. This can only happen if we are well versed in the online teaching and learning environment, knowing how to teach online, and then continuously communicating and emphasizing academic integrity amongst our students. And I think with having said that, I'm going to say thank you for now, and I'm giving over back to you. Thank you, Geertje.
You gave us so much to think about, and I see the questions coming in. I mean, just the phrase rethink assessment for learning and not of learning already just brought out a catalyst of questions here. Thank you so much, Mariette. A heads up of some of the questions coming your way. In a traditional setting, when every assessment is based much on a classroom test, what could you suggest about how to modify such a system? And I think you've mentioned so much about how we should think different in our approach with regard to assessment, more towards a teleological approach, the outcome of our assessment, not just the assessment itself. We look forward to hearing a bit more of you, Mariette. Ladies and gentlemen, keep your questions coming. For Kristen, we also have a few more questions coming your way. You have the one on the platform. Here's another great question for you. A question on the integration of fun and teaching. Someone said they like to bring in a little bit of fun when they teach. Is that okay for adult learning? And then another nice question for Kristen. To what extent does a sense of control or mastering of learning material influence brain activity during the learning process? Perhaps a bit of a tougher one, but luckily Kristen will address it. All right, now, ladies and gentlemen, we jump again to the Netherlands. And here we have Professor Rens van der Schout from Utrecht University. Rens, it's nice to also have you here with us. And he's going to talk a little bit about we science instead of me science. Rens, we are in your hands.
Oh, thank you so much. One question concerning the time. We have to stop at?
We have enough time, Rens, if you can use up to about 10 minutes for your session, and then we'll open up the floor for a little bit of a discussion.
Well, just wanted to check. Okay, so I'm going to talk about we science, and I want to start actually with a saying by Mariette, learning to become a scientist. That's something she said during her presentation, and that's of course obviously part of our education. And also Mariette said new knowledge builds on previous knowledge. So I want to take you to the next level of teaching how to become a scientist in the open science era. So we're going to take a major leap forward with open science. But as Kirsten said, this is going to take you out of your comfort zone, which is actually good, because if you're just outside your comfort zone, you'll learn most. And I think that's important. So I think we should incorporate how to become an open scientist in all of our teaching programs. So what is actually open science? What is this? I mean, we always publish a paper in a scientific journal. You do that by yourself. You don't share your data. You don't share your code. You just publish. You want as many people as possible to cite your work, and that's what we think is a good scientist? Or maybe not. So what would be a paper in the era of open science? What could be your thesis in the new era? Okay, so how does it work? Open science. You probably have heard about open access to journal articles, right? I mean, that's one thing that's very complicated because, well, let me give you an example. A couple of weeks ago, I wanted to read one of my own papers. I couldn't find it on my laptop. So I was just searching on my laptop for this paper. I couldn't find it. And I thought, oh, well, let's Google it. So I Googled my own paper and I couldn't access it. My university library did not have access to the journal I published in. So I could not read my own article. I had to pay $20 to read my own article. That's insane, people. Come on. That cannot be true. Okay, maybe I should have stored it on my laptop and I had to organize a bit better, but come on, people. It's our work. And I think that part of open science has been dealt with. We're not there yet, but most publishers are now putting many journals and many of the articles open on the internet. Or you can publish a preprint. So the version of your manuscript just before it has been accepted by the journal. Also in the COVID-19 pandemic, if your paper is about corona-related topics, then most of the journals already publish your paper open access for free. However, there's never a free lunch. So the thing is that we're not paying with our dollars, but we're now paying with data. But my presentation is not about paying with data. My presentation is about open science. So how does it work in the era of open science? So you start with a pre-registration. You first publish your ID, your research protocol. So that's basically your introduction section, your hypothesis, and your analytic strategy. So that's the part of the paper that can be published before actually collecting data. You can already publish it as a preprint. There are journals where you can publish research protocols. You get a DOI number. So a DOI means a digital object identifier. So that those are the numbers that are affiliated to research output. And if you click on it, you can actually access the paper. So that's called a DOI, a digital object identifier. So you can pre-register your study. So that's your first research output. Then you're going to collect data. And then you're going to publish your data. So a data set is actually part of research output, which you can publish. There are journals that publish data, but you can also publish your data on the Open Science Framework, on Zenodo. There are many data set repositories where you can publish your data, get a DOI. The question now is, will you simply publish your data so that everyone can use it? Is it password protected? Of course, it has to be anonymous, right? I mean, your privacy concerns, so you have to anonymize your data. You can even protect it via password, but you can also publish your data with a license. For example, a license that allows others only to use your data to reproduce the results of your final publication. Or a license so that others can use it for their research. Or even for commercial gain. There's even a license forcing others to be open as well. So if you use my data, for example, you have to be open as well. So that's already your second publication. So you have your preprint, your pre-registration is a publication, your data is a publication. Okay, you collected your data. Then you start scripting your results. So for example, in SPSS, you want to do a t-test, or you want to do a regression, or you're collecting qualitative data. You have your scripts, or maybe you analyze your data via M+ or R. So you have scripts. You can also publish the scripts. Do you know that? On Zenodo, you can actually publish your scripts. That's already your third research output. Yeah? Also, for scripts, you have licenses. Well, of course, not if you simply use a t-test in SPSS, because there's no new knowledge in it. But if you program your own function in R, for example, you can also publish it with a license so that others can use it. Okay. And then, in the end, you publish your paper. So basically the text of your publication, it's actually the result and the discussion section. So you have 4 publications instead of 1. Pre-registration, data, scripts, and the text. Now, if you dare, you can even take the next step. And that means an open workflow. That's what I now try to do with my project AS Review. This systematic reviewing tool where you can use AI machines to screen the literature during a literature search. We're developing our research openly. So you can follow everything we do. Every single line of code, every single line of text can be found on GitHub. You can read our brilliant ideas, but you can also find all our mistakes. You can also see all the bugs we introduce, how we solved all those bugs. And this is the we science part I really like. So before I publish my research paper, you can already find out what I'm doing during the process, as if you're looking into my research lab. But you can also help me. So maybe you can help me find bugs in the software, mistakes. Maybe you can help me to correct those mistakes. You know, the simplest form is by correcting spelling mistakes. That's a very simple thing you can contribute. And then we start to do we science. So you create this open science community and you do it together. This is also about giving feedback, right? The forward feedback loops Kirsten was talking about. So you're giving feedback not after you're done with your research, but during the process. Think about what this will do with your well-being. I mean, Laura told you about the well-being of students, but also the well-being of researchers. What if you're working on your code, you're stuck, and then someone else in the world helps you to solve it? That's really fun. And this is the new way of working together in an online community, in an open science world, where we actually do it together. Instead of you working in your own office, doing everything, and then after years of hard work, you publish your paper. No, already during the process, you publish bits and pieces of the paper. You work together in this open workflow. Okay. We're slowly reaching the end of the discussion of this session. And we're now going to connect my story about open science, doing it together, to other presenters. So, Laura, are you here?
I am.
Okay, cool. So, I have a question to you about well-being. So what do you think if a student would work on his or her assignments, and already during the working on the assignment, this person is doing it online, gets help from other people what will that do with the well-being of students?
I think you can't underestimate the impact that could have, because we mainly base our research on well-being on the needs people need to have fulfilled in order to feel well. And in order to flourish, you really need to feel related. And that can be either more on a social level, so your social well-being will go up, and your psychological level of feeling related to others. And I think we all realized now more than before during the pandemic that can also be online. And if you as a lecturer or as a university support that by giving a community or making personal contact possible, I think that will make a huge difference. And I also saw that when I talked to students, that the ones who only had a couple of people they worked together with, for example, because they were in a group together or because the supervisor would always manage meetings with other people, and even the online contact, that would make a world of a difference for the well-being. So excellent question.
Yeah, cool. Hey, so thanks, Laura. Kirsten, I also have a question to you. Are you here, Kirsten?
I am.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so about feedback. What would be important if you provide feedback to someone you don't know? Because so, that's online collaboration, right? I mean, we know each other, we see each other. Originally, you were in the same classroom, but what if people provide feedback to each other from all over the world?
So I would say one thing to consider is making sure students understand what it is to provide constructive feedback. Simple words such as shifting from constructive criticism to constructive feedback. When you hear criticism, even if it's coupled with the word constructive, you still have an emotional connection. I do. So simply helping to mirror. Remember, what a faculty member does or an instructor does in their classroom affects the epistemological beliefs of the student. Students will mirror practice. So if students are able to receive good feedback, embrace feedback, they will actually mirror it. And that's why the discussion boards are so important, especially online. And it allows us to see how students are providing feedback to guide them. But what you start finding is this social constructivism. They're seeing their work through multiple perspectives, and they see themselves, as you said, as a scientist. And it goes back to you can't be what you can't see, and it decreases that imposter phenomena because they're getting feedback and they're learning to embrace it as opposed to being reactive. It's more proactive.
And it's all about positive feedback, right? I mean,
it is. Going back to Laura, yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Hey, Mariette, I also have a question to you about assessment. Because if you do re-science and if you put that into practice in a student community, how to assess then the quality of a product, because it's a joint effort. How can you ever assess the quality of an individual student then? Do you have any idea how to do this? Because I'm struggling with it in my own teaching. I mean, many students are collaborating online, even if we want them or not. But how can we then assess it? Or do we have to completely change the way we assess joint work?
Yes, thank you. That's a very relevant question, Rens, and a very apt timing for asking such a question. And I think it comes back where my approach was to say you cannot expect students to produce a summative assessment assignment, where you assess this, and there's not evidence of a scaffolded formative assessment. And there comes back GP also to the question that was posed in the chat, is what do we mean by assessment for learning? So you can actually build on a portfolio of student assessment marks and not rely only on that assessment. And during this, you can actually incorporate practices of assessment for learning, and in terms of applying higher order thinking skills, and not only applying knowledge, because especially in an online environment, it's just nothing to Google. It's nothing to have your book open in front of you. So I think that is what we mean by being innovative in our assessment practices. And for me, the key is regarding the socio-cultural diversity of our students and allowing them epistemological access. So what does that mean? It allows them to become a scientist. And that means our assessment practices should be more authentic. And then obviously what your expectation is of that group assignment should be clearly communicated. So there's many ways in approaching group work assignments and assessments, but I think there should be an authentic part in terms of how do I actually take my lower order thinking skills, transfer them into higher order thinking skills, because obviously you cannot have higher order skills application if we don't have the lower order skills. So for me, it's actually being authentic in our assessment practices, scaffolding assessment for learning to assessment of learning, and how do we communicate that assessment expectations, either individual or group. Yes.
Yeah, makes perfectly sense. Thank you so much. Probably there are more questions via the chat, right?
And I think we can run just through a few, if you don't mind, if you can keep your answers as short as possible. We still have some content to run through. Rens, what about diverse feedback, and upon receiving it, getting all confused and actually never finishing your work. Many people have had to work with a co-supervisor, and having 2 or 3 supervisors is quite a challenging thing. Now, if we go to WeScience, doesn't it just get worse?
Yes, because then you don't have 3 supervisors, but maybe 3,000 supervisors that want to make changes. But then, you know, science is never done. It's continuously updating knowledge. So if you take the highest level perspective, you know, we're updating science. We're building on previous knowledge. We learn something new. We have new knowledge, and we keep on updating our knowledge. So that's the process of science. Of course, you have to sometimes submit a report or publish a paper. So that's just like a snapshot of the current state of affairs. And I think it's okay to show your audience that there is discussion, that there is debate, that there is uncertainty. And that's what we call a discussion section.
Thank you, Rens. Kristen, we had a few questions coming your way as well. I don't know if you've kept track of them.
I did. And I wanted to just say this. I'm going to share my screen for 2 seconds because I didn't realize that when I was presenting, you didn't get to actually see the applications. So one of the questions had to do with applications. Well, I actually, while everyone was speaking, created a link that I'll share with all of you. These are applications. They're free. You can use. But some of the things, Padlet allows you as an educator, as a faculty, or as a lecturer, you can access it for low cost. Students can access it for free. But when I was talking about having students moving away from text to create their own definitions, you can use infographics, and they can choose any application of their choice. So when we talk about control, choice, identity, that helps students with intrinsic motivation. When we talk about being a learning scientist, same exact assignment on a really complex topic. I told you about the brain. Look at this. This would have typically been a text discussion board in a paragraph. When you're using multiple means of representation, or whether it's somebody actually creating a presentation, when the students actually go in and review posts of their peers, they're practicing space practice. They're practicing retrieval, elaboration. This was a fun video. I'm not going to play it again, but you're going to actually see how this student took a Steve Tyler video and integrated music into that. So I would say fun. What does it mean to have fun? When the body enjoys what it's doing and it's something exciting, it releases more dopamine. This allows you to have stronger connections in short-term memory moving to long-term memory. So look at fun as not necessarily, oh, it has to be, you know, comedian type fun. Fun in terms of providing UDL, multiple means of representation. Let them see things through multiple lenses instead of all text. Let them thrive with these concepts through writing, through the arts, but still require them to write that hard paper at the end. But by then they'll have decreased that concern of imposter phenomena. So I think I answered all 3 questions with that.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Ladies and gentlemen, there are so many questions. I invite you to contact us at Optentia. We'll gladly engage with you a little bit further. But I want to get to the short learning program. And we are very fortunate to have our own Acting Deputy Vice Chancellor here for Research and Innovation at the Noordwes-Universiteit, Professor Frans Wanders. Professor Wanders, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. It's nice to have you here. Thank you so much.
Epi, I first want to apologize because, you know, deciding between the SLP and the VC and the chair of council, it's not easy to pick, but I had to attend my task agreement even as an acting DVC, and thus I was about 10-15 minutes late. I could not do the introduction, but thank you very much. I'm listening keen, and it's clear you people speak quite a different language than an engineer. If you look at today is the fourth day of the third month, 21. So we are doing 4, 3, 2, 1, and that's an engineer. We can work with numbers and so on. But thank you very much. It's very enlightening to listen to all of you, and I'm enjoying it. And sorry again for being late. All the best. Thank you.
Prof. Anders, you are already forgiven. Thank you so much for being here. All right, now, ladies and gentlemen, let's get to the short learning program in research design that we have here in Optentia at the Northwest University. We're going to show you a short video that gives you a bit of an overview of what it entails. Do enjoy. During 2020, a diverse group of Northwest University staff members collaborated to create an online short learning program, SLP, in research design, specifically designed for novice researchers. While the challenges created by the COVID-19 lockdown indeed emphasized the need for flexibility in tertiary education, it also opened the door to transfer an existing in-person course to a short learning program. This program would focus on online learning rather than just teaching, to build participants' research methodology capabilities. The SLP includes 10 study units and goes beyond guiding students through the intricacies of qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods research designs. It shows participants where their research fits within the context of the university's research focus. It also teaches them how to use various statistical software, and finally, how to move beyond the write-up for their degree and translate their findings to actually impact society.
Good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to say welcome to the synchronous group session interview, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. So what a wonderful privilege to engage with you in gaining some insights today from your experience of the online approach to this short learning program on research design offered by Optentia. I am sure you are as excited as I am about this novel approach in learning about research.
So my definition of online learning would be where the material and engagement all happens on a digital platform without having to get in my car and drive anywhere, which is what I really love about it. That everything is available virtually at your fingertips and whenever you're ready to engage.
The self-directed nature of it, and the fact that you can engage with the platform in your own time, that has been really exciting for me. Being able to pace yourself and be autonomous in your approach, and being able to rewind the videos and listen again to get a bit more clarity and wrap your head around the concept. That for me has been quite enjoyable. I enjoyed that part.
So in my opinion, one of the biggest things for the online SLP type of programs is the fact that it needs to be very well thought out and well structured. You need to know exactly when your assignments are due, and you need to know exactly what is expected of you. So having trackers to look at where you're at and what you still have to do, and just to keep you on track, I think that's very important.
I would say that the most important ingredient for any online program is to have a stable platform. If you are an online student, you want to ensure that you have a platform that allows you to have the resources at your fingertips, but at the same time ensure that it is user friendly. For example, with Optentia short learning program, what's really nice is that it runs on two platforms. It runs on Ifundi and it runs on Drives. So this for me was something that was very important, because they ensured that they had a backup so that all of their participants to the learning program always had access to the content. And this also then enhances your convenience and your learning experience in a positive way.
So I've been doing online learning from 2013 when I started my BE Science Honours, in my MBA in finance. I was doing it UK universities. So one thing I'm quite happy about this SLP now, it's much more advanced than what I used to do with these UK universities. There's quite more flexibility, user-friendly. There's quite more better things which I can say if I compare to these UK universities. There's much a good improvement, advancement. I think 8 out of 10, I like this.
On a scale of 1 to 10, I think I would rate it 10. The reason I say this is because of my personality preference. I'm the type of individual that's very structured. So based on how this learning, the short learning program was structured, is that everything was automatically and already uploaded. So once study unit was done, I did not have to wait for notes to be emailed to me or wait for presenters to upload the next study unit. So I would say that my rating would be a 10 because it is a positive experience and it's just easily accessible at any time.
For me, the part that has made it most exciting is the slides. I don't know what to call it, but the animated slides where they convey a short video summarizing the information for you. When I did my honors, we had a lot of information to read through, especially when it came to the different types of research. You had to comb through a lot of things just to get a basic understanding. So for the fact that there's already a slide there that summarizes everything for you, easing you into the content, it makes it that much easier. Also for the fact that they plug in different videos. They don't explain the same concept in one way. So for example, with just the introductory, I think they explain the basic versus applied research in 3 different videos. So even if you don't understand one individual, there's always another resource that you can refer to. The last one that I also have been excited most about is the forums. As previously stated, sometimes you understand something one way, but then you go online and you see how people have interpreted it. So it's not necessarily just about facts, but you get to understand people's different objectives, which I think is also very important, especially in research, because one thing we have to get acquainted with is the fact that research at times is subjective. People will have different opinions on things, but getting to understand how people have been viewing the same set of information, I think it's also helping me in communicating clearly. It's helping me in how am I going to approach my research content to get people to reach not necessarily the exact same conclusion that I'm trying to get them to, but to have a similar view to what I am trying to say. So I think the forums are helping me with that, shaping my discussions and my understanding of people, and also clearly communicating and being concise.
You need to really understand the constructs really well before you can actually start to really apply them. So I think you need to be open-minded and you need to be able to make the time to put in the work, because it's not just a one and done. Research is not as easy as I think a lot of people perceive it to be.
What is most valuable for me is to be driven, to know what is your research focus and to focus on that, because you can get sidetracked very easily and start reading up on other things that you're not actually, because you're wasting time. And then of course, time management skills is also something that's crucial.
Really a stable foundation in terms of my research principles, the principles of research, and having that foundation will most importantly give me confidence when it comes to research. Because the biggest problem with me when it came to research, or whenever I thought about research, it was I never felt competent, even though I have my master's degree, but research was always something that I kind of always shied away from. But I feel from the experience that I've had so far with the SLP, I feel I can see that a firm foundation is being built, and with that comes confidence, to say, okay, if I have this foundation, then I know what I'm doing and I can do it.
You don't have to know before you try. So something that's been interesting for me with this SLP is because I've never learned online before, that you can learn experientially and you can learn practically as you go. And if you sit okay with or comfortably with the uncertainty principle, which is that you're comfortable with not knowing and you can just discover as you go along, then you're actually a lot more capable and competent than you think you are. And you actually have a wonderful potential to learn in ways that you never knew that you had before. So that's something that definitely came up when we were working in a group today, that we can just kind of make it up as we go along and find our way, and we have the capacity to do that.
Engaging in the short learning programs gives this refreshing perspective. It gives this new hunger for research and new understanding for research, and you're then able to pursue the research problems that you want to look at, or the niche areas that you want to look at, with even better understanding, with even a fresher perspective, and with even more passion. So I would say, yeah.
But how do you fit all a researcher must learn in an online SLP with all the benefits and engagement you would expect from a traditional SLP? While the SLP was designed to give the student maximum opportunity to become a confident researcher, new students may first have to set aside time to navigate adapting to online learning, technical issues, their own level of computer literacy, time management, and motivation. The collaborative approach used by educators, subject specialists, and instructional designers is a vital link to create an environment that allows learners to meet learning outcomes. Utilizing dedicated software, the development of the SLP include considerations such as metacognition, neuroplasticity of the brain, cognitive load, and the universal design of learning. Universal learning design is an educational framework used for flexible learning environments that can accommodate individual learning differences, such as online learning platforms. The first pillar of universal design learning is a recognition network. It deals with the what and involves multiple methods of representation to give learners various ways of acquiring knowledge. The second pillar is an affective network. It concerns the why and involves multiple ways of engagement to tap learners' interests, challenge them appropriately, and motivate them to learn. There are three types of engagement: instructor to student engagement, student to content engagement, and student to student engagement. The third pillar is a strategic network. It deals with the how and enables multiple means of expression to provide learners alternatives for demonstrating what they know. The online SLP in research design is available on 3 platforms, namely Rise Articulate, eFundi, and Glide, and can be accessed through a computer and mobile devices. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed that video and it gave you a bit of insight beyond what the program entails. We are very fortunate to have the director of Optentia also here with us in this webinar, Professor Ian Rothman, and he can tell us a bit more about what actually drove the rationale behind the program and what made them come up with this. Professor Rothman, Ian, it's nice to have you here in this webinar as well.
Good afternoon, GP, and thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to share a bit more about the motivation and how we approach this development of this online SLP in research methodology. So on the one hand, we have this need for the development of capabilities in research methodology, and we have observed that over the years. So we have put an SLP in research design into place and get it approved through the university. And we refined it over a period of 5 years. During that time, we always felt that because of the complexity of the material that we deal with, we want to individualize learning much more, which is often difficult because you see students for a week in a workshop, and then all the content have to be dealt with. So with the pandemic and the lockdown, it was as if we got the opportunity when our schedule of training in workshops was disrupted to now, for once and for all, develop this online SLP in research design. As I said, you're working with complex concepts, methods, you think of statistics. So the use of online learning, the use of videos, the use of exercises and autonomous learning are really important. And then on the other hand, we have existing capabilities, because for the last 10 years, we have been developing our people really in methodology and in statistics and so on. So this was the opportunity to use also the capabilities of people and to develop it further. Now, on this slide, you will see the 3 components of capability, because you will notice that I use the word capability quite a lot. And capability means 3 things for me. Firstly, it is whether people value what they are learning or doing. And secondly, whether they feel enabled to do what they need to do. And then thirdly, whether they have efficacy, whether they feel competent, whether they are competent and feel competent. So value and importance is an individual kind of thing. It demonstrates the need for autonomy. The enablement aspect is contextual, and obviously efficacy is also individual thing. But when we started this online SLP, we expected to register about 15 to 20 masters and PhD students in the program in January 2021. We actually got 160 people who registered. So this was really a challenge for us. And then we found also staff members registered for this SLP. Now, important from the slide is that we asked people, how important is research methodology for you and knowledge about that? And 92% of participants said they value it, they regard it as important. Now, the 8% who said they didn't is a challenge, because how do you learn when you don't regard something as important? The second component is really important, and that is the enablement of people. Do your work situation allow you actually to study and to do research? Do your manager allow you? Do you have a computer at home? Enablement, and 50% of the people said that they were enabled. Efficacy is also important, because that is the competency, and that is why people registered for the course. And 30% of people felt that they were reasonably competent and efficacious in research methodology. So you can see that our big challenge in online learning SLP is enablement and efficacy, it seems, here. Important to remember. We set up a core team of 31 people in total, including support staff, leaders, educational experts, instructional designers, and support staff to develop this online SLP from the current existing SLP that we had. They had to collaborate and develop and use their capabilities. And we ask all these people to go through training in a mind-brain education, and Prof. Kristen Betts was playing a big role with Dr. Mariette Fourie in that training. But on that image that you see there, you can see the multidisciplinary nature of the people who were involved, from education, positive psychology, management, industrial psychology, positive organizational scholarship, risk management, financial management. So it was a multidisciplinary group who worked on this SLP. So we obtained the necessary software packages. For instance, Interact 123 is a package that was also developed by Prof. Kristen Bett, and which helps you to think about what you develop. It helps you to plan and not to overload students in what you do. In terms of student-to-content engagement, we capitalized on previous professional videos that we have developed in the entity. We had 12 new videos produced, and you must remember that this is money. It's cost to produce these videos, but we already had 22 previously produced videos on research methodology, where we had top researchers teaching about research methodology. We also had narrated slideshows for each study unit, and we decided to train our people in open source free statistical software. So the YASP program, which is comparable with the SPSS program, but it's for free. We are training students in that, in R and R Studio, which are all free packages. And we see the advantages of people immediately having free software available in order to do their analysis if they want to. But we also included lecturer to student engagement. There are 20 contact sessions. There's Mentimeter, Telegram, chat rooms, forums, where we actually engage with students. And then student-to-student engagement, which is a very important component, on Telegram, chat rooms, forums, Flinguards, a software package, and then group work, for instance, some phenomenon-based learning that we implemented. We also decided to assess the readiness for the online SLP, because people need computer skills, and then first refer people to competence development if necessary. And then important, we decided to include psychological readiness of students for their studies or for research in the program. So we have a very nice part of one study unit where students look at themselves and their own well-being and their own capabilities. And then also we had to decide on our assessment strategy, the formative and summative assessments, and I'm not going into detail about those. Quickly, just from my side, the 10 study units, there's an introduction to science and research to bring every person to the same sort of level on what we mean when we talk about science and research. So there's also a rationale for the order in which we have these study units. The second study unit is about the entity that you are part of, the philosophies, the questions, the programs, the support available in the entity. And then the research process at the university, and also the psychological readiness for study and for research. Study Unit 4 is about the research proposal mainly, and also ethics, aspects and clearance. And Study Unit 5 is all about literature reviews, from types of literature reviews to how to use the library. We have a part on academic writing, and we use experts in these fields to provide inputs in teaching our students. And then Study Unit 6 to 8 is about qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods research, a study unit about every one of those types of research. And in Study Unit 9, we focus on 5 statistical packages. And YASP, for instance, include both frequentist and Bayesian kind of analyses. So we like that. And it's for free as well. M+ is obviously a system where you need to buy licenses, but then R and R Studio is for free. And we also train our students, some of them in Excel or EViews, because they might be economics and management students who prefer to use EViews. And then the last study unit is all about publishing your research and then also communicating it and the impact of research. My last slide is about conclusions. and a way forward. What we have seen here is we have a much better program than we ever had with face-to-face SLP. It doesn't mean that once situation of the pandemic change, that we will totally go back to disregard contact sessions, but what we will never lose is what we have now. And we have a much better sort of methodology and activities to train our people in complex kind of issues. But we also see, and we are learning, it's demanding for students. So we are making our observations. We see high engagement of learners, but also many of these students are working, they have a career, and it is difficult. So we are looking at options where it's currently a 3-month program to extend it for some students based on their choice and keep it flexible to 6 months, but still keep the 3 months option as well. And what the second point is, we are learning valuable lessons during the implementation, a lot of lessons, more than we ever thought, and we will adapt and refine. And also by just listening to Mariette and Kristen this afternoon about what they suggest, there are more learning experiences that we want to integrate. And lastly, we want to collaborate with other research entities at the university to see how we can contextualize the online SLP and make it available to master's and PhD students and emerging researchers at the Northwest University. Gepe, that's my story. I'm going to stop there in the interest of time.
Thank you, Ian. Really appreciate it. Just two quick questions. Obviously, this is very enticing for people who've already completed their PhD, but they still have to do a lot of research. They're still in this publish or perish business, and we're not yet where Rens is in terms of getting a lot of publications out. So they'd love to enroll for this. So is it open even after you've completed your PhD? That's the first question. And then secondly, do you have to take the entire course, or can you select units on its own?
Obviously, let me first start by the second question, and that is what we are now learning. But remember, the SLP is an approved course at the university or an approved program, so we cannot just change around as we wish. But what we are talking about with colleagues is about the possibility of making the various study units available as needed by people. So that is one of the things that we are considering. I mean, we also need much more time in some of the topics, for instance, statistical methods and so on, to do more in-depth kind of training than what we do. But for now, we are looking at sort of the possibility of at some stage isolating the different study units and a person get a qualification or the short learning program certificate once he or she completed the whole course then, but there might be other options that we focus on parts of the SLP. Secondly, anyone is free to actually register for this SLP. It doesn't matter whether you have a PhD, you can still enroll for the SLP.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll allow me a quick last word from our panel. It was so wonderful to have them here. I wish we could continue with the webinar. I'm sure we can arrange a braai. Kristen and well, Laura knows what it is now. Rens, I'm not sure if you know what a braai is, but perhaps we could have organized a braai here to continue a little bit on. Laura, are you happy with what you see in the SLP from your perspective? We're talking about the well-being of the student. Do you think that it is addressed within this SLP?
Yes, I'm very happy with it because I was actually also asked to, with some others, to deliver one part where we support the students in their well-being, and I just received the feedback, and it was really amazing to read, and all the things, all the tips that students gave during my research were actually addressed in there, also in the rest of the SLP. So I actually think that it's an amazing start to support the well-being of at least our students. So I hope we can reach as many people as possible.
Thank you, Laura. Mariette, I want to ask you as well regarding the assessment and the assessment component within the SLP. Are you happy with what you've seen?
GP, yes, from my side, I am so excited. We are focusing much on scholarship of teaching and learning, where we actually bring in research-led teaching and learning. And what is exciting for me is that we can actually now do the opposite, bring in teaching and learning into research, postgraduate studies. And that is truly exciting and amazing. And the way that the SLP has been set up, the feedback that we got from the students, I really think it testifies of a universal design for learning approach, where there's multiple means of engagement, stimulating the affective network, the emotional part of learning. Students are excited about this SLP. We had testimonies of being more confident in research, even though they've completed master degrees, and that is exciting. The teaching and learning component incorporated into the research short learning program, and how we scaffold our students, how we guide them towards being a researcher, providing that epistemological access. In specifically study unit 4, I think Ian spoke about learning the language of research. So a student is said to have epistemological access if he can speak the language. And I think that is exactly what this SLP is doing. It's covering a wide variety of topics. And I really think it's exciting, as you have alluded, even for postdoctoral studies. Postdoctoral endeavors, this research program can still learn you a lot. I always say we are indeed not neuroscientists, but we are one of the few professions that must make the brain change. And what a wonderful opportunity to engage in this. Thank you, Gepe.
Thank you, Mariette. Now, Kristen, the brains are changing already, even after this webinar, and most assuredly so within this SLP, I think.
So I want to say it is so rare that educators have the opportunity to build something from the ground up with such incredible experts from around the world. And to create an SLP that builds on universal design for learning, culturally responsive pedagogy that has so many perspectives and is using really data to inform decision making, I think what has been created is an incredible model that can be replicated, and it builds upon everything that was shared through the presenters. As Laura talked about, this concept of imposter phenomena. You could have the highest degree, but once that creeps in, it can change your own mindset. And so courses like this are creating growth mindsets. In an online classroom, there's no back row, so you have to be engaged. Building upon what Ren said, it's helping you see yourself as a scientist and gain those skills, as Mariette talked about, cognition, metacognition, epistemic cognition. So, I just want to give a big shout out to Ian and his team that have pulled it together. And I can't wait to see what's next post-pandemic, because the footprint of Noordwes-Universiteit and Optentia, it's limitless. Very, very exciting.
Thank you, Kristen, and thank you for being part of the team as well. Now, Rens, you've heard yourself being mentioned here. I'm sure that you're happy to see publishing and the relevance of research also being a part of this SLP.
Yes, but what's even better is that the software Ian is proposing is open science software. So the cool thing about JASP is that it is an open science project. So you can actually contribute to the code if you'd like, or just use it because it's free. But it's open science, so we can actually, we scientists, we can check what's going on under the hood, and that's what I really like, because there are some serious bugs in software like SPSS or M+, but you never know because the source code is closed. But with JASP, we can actually check what's going on, we can correct it if it's wrong, and we can help improve. So I very much like the way forward to using R and JASP and open software. So good step for open science.
Thank you, Rens. And thank you to all the other panel members as well for contributing and participating in this webinar. Ian, to you and your team, you make us proud. Thank you so much for all your hard work. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to know more about what we've spoken about this afternoon, or if you have unanswered questions, we have the people with the answers. Contact us at the Northwest University. Your postgraduate journey starts here. Thank you so much for being part of this webinar. You can contact us. There's a lady called Lynn Boyson who will also be available to handle your queries and answer your questions from Optentia at the Northwest University. That concludes our webinar. Have a good day.